It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone. So my name's Steve Scully. I'm a MD, PhD, and an entrepreneur at heart. And I started this company called Thaddeus Medical Systems to originally start to help reducing medical error in the clinical pathology space, and subsequently pivoted to, because the technology wasn't really available to make the product that I wanted to solve that problem. And so a related problem was also the temperature control and tracking for therapeutics and the biologics and the home infusion and that sort of stuff, and vaccines as well. And part of the slideshow I'm going to share with you kind of speaks to that as well. And in this COVID environment, it's very relevant that it's in the news a lot that the distribution has been lagging and falling drastically behind the production of the vaccine. It's amazing that they could get a vaccine out in less than a year. It's just incredible when you think of what the traditional routes have usually been. And so with that, I'm going to jump into the presentation, if that's okay. Can everybody see my screen? I'm going to go into presentation mode.
We sure can.
Okay. So, but to that point, I have heard and I've seen that that Alaska is doing an amazing job with the distribution and the outreach of the vaccine deployment to remote communities. So amazing job, Alaska. Whoever is doing that is doing an amazing job. You guys are leading the country. So this is kind of a moot point, I think, for Alaska, but everybody else needs this. All right, so for the whole country, we were talking about 360 million people in North America, and so it's been described as the most advanced logistics challenge since World War II. And why is it an advanced logistics challenge? Because there really haven't been significant, drastic changes in the way that we store and transport temperature-sensitive medicines. And so this is a clip from last 2 years ago now. That was just showing that vaccine storage before COVID was still a problem, not the transport, which can lead to 20% of shipments can fail, but the storage of the vaccines at hospitals and at clinics would often failed to meet the standard. And so what we now have on top of us with COVID is even more potential spoilage and waste of unused vaccines, having to revaccinate patients that are also potentially left unprotected against deadly disease. And so what that really means when you kind of do the math is that potentially we're losing $500 million to $2 billion in lost revenue. We're delaying people getting vaccinated because of the spoilage that's occurring, avoidable death and morbidity, longer shutdowns, and loss of trust in medical entities and the government. That being said, Operation Warp Speed has done an amazing job making sure they have tons of oversight on these vaccines as they're being shipped. So it's not so much from what I've read, it's not so much of an issue getting it from the manufacturer to the states or to those distributors. What's more of an issue, and what I think is causing in some capacity the holdup for the rollout, is because there are no real good solutions for controlling and tracking the temperature and having a chain of custody and security as well. So that's what we have with Thaddeus Medical, is the i-Q-ler. And so this is a product that's been designed for real rugged scenario. It's very ruggedly designed for a lot of abuse and for high durability in the retail cold supply chain. We can control temperature from -20 all the way up to body temperature 37. So it both heats and cools. So it can also have really tight temperature tolerance, so that it's only deviating plus or minus 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. We provide real-time tracking, communication, and security with a military spec case that is, as I said, very rugged, durable, And we have a chain of custody solution as well, so that we know who's opened it, when and where they were, and all the environmental data to go with that. The battery lasts about 2 days without a recharge, and it can obviously be used as a storage unit as well. As if you plug it in, it'll last for decades, like a typical refrigerator. And as I mentioned, it can do -20 frozen. So this is a very potentially good solution for the Moderna vaccine that has to be stored at um, last mile entities, remote clinics, and can also go out into the field and will last for 2 days without a recharge. Um, so the software is compliant with industry and federal standards. We're tracking location, temperature, pressure, humidity, light, if it's dropped and there's a shock that the payload is exposed to, and battery percentage. And we're partnering with Masterlock to provide this security, this chain of custody, so that any access is authorized with permissions by administrators, and can be unlocked with your phone through a mobile app. There are competitors out there, but no one that's really doing everything that we're doing. So there are reusable active battery powered systems, Sofragam, C-Safe, Nullenbox, MicroQ. The ones that are very durable often tend to be the heavier ones. This one is about 150 pounds, so it's not practical for real um, for like for one of our beta pilots has some elderly people that work there, and they're not able to even carry the 30-pound medical cooler that we have, and so for 150 pounds, it's just completely unpractical. Sofragam iBox is kind of the same. I think it's about 60 pounds. The ones that are very lightweight, under 30 pounds, are not very durable or rugged, and so if you drop them, they could potentially break. And then no one's doing the security, chain of custody, and alerts that we're doing as well. As I alluded to earlier, the cooler is a modular design that's been a ton of thought has gone into the design of it, so that it's not only optimized for lightweightness and to be able to handle different payloads, but it's optimized for high volume manufacturing as well. So I was very blessed to come across a guy who used to work at Thermo King, where they make all the tractor trailer refrigerators, and he has a ton of mechanical and electrical engineering experience. So very relevant find, and he happens to be an hour away. So that's amazing. I have to say that every time. It's just floored that I was able to connect with him. So we have 2 units. We have the 4 unit that I showed you earlier, and this is a picture of the 10 unit. It can hold either 3,000 doses of the Moderna or the whole stack of the Pfizer box, and can do -20 or refrigeration 2 to 8C. As both units have a similar type of battery uptime for about 48 hours, and it can be plugged in. Right now, it can be just plugged in with a typical extension outlet, but we're making modifications so that you can also use a car to plug it in. As I mentioned, Russ Sanders, amazing engineer. I can't say that enough. And he brought in a whole team of experts that are all alumni of Thermo King. And so he designed it to meet, he's actually helping set the standards for the WHO certification process. We're almost complete with our verification and testing. It'll take a few more months, but we're almost there. This is a class 2 exempt device, so everything except for organs, we're able to transport: blood products, cellular therapies, biologics, insulin, opioids that are in a liquid format, so controlled substances, all made here in Minnesota, and potential launch date of April. We have a lot of IP around different things in the cooler and other potential products that assist the cooler. It's an enormous market in the home healthcare space, and it's only increasing because of everybody wants to avoid the hospitals and clinics anyway because of COVID. And there's also increases in the predominance of biological therapies becoming more prominent and needing that temperature control and tracking. And those are becoming more widespread because of the increasing chronic disease and elderly population as well. Excuse me. And so the total available US market is about 750,000 coolers. If we think of all the pharmacies, hospitals, logistics, medical distributors, surgery centers, visiting nurses, home infusion, etc. So we're thinking that we can price this at around 10,000 because some of the other active solutions are around 8,000, and we're offering a lot more features and functions. And there is a cost for the data as well. This is just kind of a strategic path that initially we're thinking it would all be home infusion based, and then we could ease into the logistics space. And then, COVID came, and so we ramped up very quickly for that opportunity with a lot of effort and time so that we could ramp up manufacturing very quickly, and we're still waiting on the funding to come through. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. Amazing team made up of Russ Sanders and Bob Elwell. So they both handle the hardware engineering and the software, and a lot of advisors on the board to help out with that are subject matter experts in everything from business to logistics to government to pathology to engineering and healthcare. That's our first customer. We are raising funds, so if anyone is interested, you can reach out to me later. So thank you very much. I'll stop there. And I probably went on way too long. I'm sorry.
No, you did fine. You did awesome. That's
Okay,
awesome.
thanks.
We'll leave your slides up for just a minute,
Yep.
but then we can you can unshare in just a minute. I just want to make sure that people have a chance to look at your information. Steve, I know that you started this before COVID. You saw the problem before COVID, and so what's interesting to me is that this is front of mind. So you took a problem that was pretty under the radar, and then suddenly it's blasted out into the open, and here you are. One thing that's really interesting that you and I have spoken about is that chain of custody is really important for things like opioids and things like that.
Yeah.
Can you maybe speak to that? Like, how have you been in conversations? I know COVID has taken over the conversation, but have you spoken to other people, or can you talk to us a little bit about that problem?
Sure. So, as it is now with the customer that we were engaged with, they were that was the main problem that they were concerned about was theft or loss of the opioids. They were very concerned from a risk standpoint if they were to try and expand their operations and start having nurses go up to really remote locations and be overnight there. What would happen if it got lost while en route or in a hotel somewhere, as well as having some temperature control and tracking that can last as well. So from a liability perspective, they were very concerned that they could get shut down if they tried to expand or help people that were outside of their kind of normal boundaries. Also, not just geographically the remote locations, but also, if they wanted to try and find other ways of increasing operations, so using couriers to ship these products so that it doesn't have a designated nurse with the product at all times. That's something that they were considering trying to get a variance from the state pharmaceutical board. So and they're still in the early stages of doing that, but yeah, the chain of custody is really important. And this is kind of the best solution I could kind of come up with, was using what MasterLock already had and trying to integrate with their API. So
awesome. So you can start sharing your screen if you like. I'm going to
okay.
open this up for open questions. I know that there's people on this call today who have experience working with opioids and trying to do that kind of work. So if there's any questions. And then, you know, we always ask what we as a community can do for you. We steal that from the 1 million cups. So
Uh-huh.
maybe,
Yeah, I think you know, Jackie, done a lot trying to connect me with different people. So your work, I think, you've done just a great job. So thank you. Yeah, if anyone else thinks of any or has connections for people that are trying to help with pain management and they're doing home infusions or um, specialty pharmacies, home infusion groups, that would be amazing.
okay, there's one question,
Oh,
and Nigel Sharp has a question. Go ahead, Nigel.
Thanks, Jacqueline. Hey, Steve. Great presentation. Thank you for putting that in there. Kind of curious on, you know, how much right now are you leveraging some of the, you know, there's a lot of federal agencies in the last year have really sort of opened up buckets of money to really support innovations that helps with COVID-19 responses. It feels like, as you said, Operation Warp Speed has really opened up what feels like, you know, almost unlimited, you know, buckets of money to support this. Are you leveraging any of those current programs, and are you tracking any right now with solicitations out there, as well as
so,
like also venture funds that are doing that kind of thing as well? So
yeah, so we're applying to a lot of angels and VCs, but you know, it's a very it's a risky kind of business. There's a lot of competition. It's risky because it's a new product in a very tightly controlled and regulated space, and um, so you know, I was really expecting and hoping that we would get government funding at this point. We did have a opportunity to present in front of BARDA and DoD individuals that are part of Operation Warp Speed, and they loved it, but they didn't have any. We talked to them back in November, and the funding had really dried up at that point. So they did make some connections that we're still trying to work, and so there may be something that comes of it, but nothing at the moment.
yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I mean, I think you're right. There was last summer there was like this big drop out of like everybody was readjusting budgets to do that. So I think there was a lot of funds floating out there, and it was really for folks who had like manufacturing lines already set and everything ready to go.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. So it's hard because like startups are on the other end of like, we can get there if we have access to some of those funds. I totally
Capital. Exactly.
I feel that you're right. The venture and the angel funds have come into it now this year saying, yeah, we want to start doubling down on things that are more post-COVID and like, what are we going to do with this new society? And there's a gap there for all these companies that could, you know, but there are other funds that I'm kind of like, you know, at least tracking loosely that are very much centered around how do we best respond to like future concerns of this, and like, you know, specifically with vaccine distribution, it feels like that's still a really hot topic right now. And you know, it's a global topic, so it's not just the US, you know, that's in there. And it feels
Yep.
so much of what you've done is military spec. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out as like, it's good to have you in mind, and like, you know, as those opportunities come through, I'll be happy to forward on some pieces. But
Oh, that'd be amazing. Thank you, Nigel.
thanks, Steve. Thanks for the presentation.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks,
And I have a couple questions too.
Yep, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so the first question is, you know, obviously anything in the medical field is going to be highly regulated, but it seems like there may be some adjacent industries where not so highly regulated, and the ones that come to mind are things like research, or, you know, in Alaska.
I'm sorry, what?
For
I didn't hear you.
So research is
Oh,
the
research.
primary
Yeah,
thing.
of course. Yeah, like so for scientific life science research, of course, definitely.
Yeah, and then, you know, in Alaska, and this may be a stretch, but those who have been on some of our maritime calls will know that, you know, maritime mariculture, fish farms, shellfish farms, that kind of thing, they have to do regular testing, and what they have to do is they have to take a sample and refrigerate it and send to a lab down south. And you know, it is actually an issue that the samples are contaminated by the time they get there. So maybe
That's a
not,
great pitch. I didn't know about that. Thank you, Jake. So it's the
yeah,
fish
and
farm
I think,
or
you know, in agriculture in general, there are those kind of problems. So you know, that was my first question, if you looked at those adjacent industries.
yeah.
And then the second one
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
is larger. Sorry, I'm just trying to be quick so that
Oh, you're
I'll
fine.
pass it off to you, and then somebody else can answer the question or ask a question. But the last question is, what do you see as the biggest threat? And I think you're in an interesting position in that you have you know, I think Nigel addressed your timing was sort of not quite ready for the money last year, and now you're
Now we're gonna almost be too late. Exactly. Yeah.
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 So besides funding, what do you think is the biggest threat to your business, say, for the next 18 months?
Well, I don't think it's opportunity for applications. I mean, it's a very, I think the biggest threat is just the reluctance for people to give up the status quo and not use something more sophisticated than styrofoam and ice and dry ice and gel packs. And it's a hard, we're kind of a B2B company as well. So it's even more difficult to try and get that user adoption. With regards to the, so that's the biggest threat, just reluctance to shift adoption from the consumer or the companies or the business. And with regards to the agriculture, though, like we were originally thinking of, helping out with the fish and grocery or kind of food and delivery for cold chain for food and things that need to be refrigerated and frozen. And it quickly, became apparent that, this is not, that problem is kind of solved for a lot of, for bulk shipping of large volumes of fish or product. They're not going to need a small cooler, but for the application that you mentioned, that the testing of those specimens, like that's a perfect fit, I think. So if you have any connections there that you can make for me, Jake, that'd be amazing. Is it the fish farmers or the is there probably the department of
I don't have any direct resources, but I can ask around.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Jake and I have worked on some of this stuff before with some companies, but I'm blanking on his name, Jake, but he works downtown in Anchorage. Jackson, you probably remember as well. Super switched on, does like sort of a lot of the camera processing and analysis of like the fish processing. You remember, Jake? Oh, she's muted.
Jared Fuller.
Yeah, Jared would know those people who are directly involved in actually doing those sample analysis tests, because we were looking at a company or looking at technology that was focused around doing on-site DNA analysis of these things, because the big challenge is that right now the samples go back to labs. Could you take the labs out and put them on the small boats? That's still super early, and I mean, therefore, there is really a gap in the market. Until that becomes really portable and applicable, there's this current need for moving samples back safely and quickly to labs to be tested, or maintain temperature controlled environments is really big. And the chain of custody is huge in those kind of projects, because they absolutely are regulated markets, and there's always a concern that someone flips out the fish sample or whatever it is last minute and does something. So those things are really interesting there. Yeah.
Super. What was Jared's last name again? I'm sorry.
Fuller. I can share that with you. What I'd like to do is kind of bring this back to kind of, I love this conversation. Steve, you've kind of showed behind the curtains. I think your company is a little bit earlier stage than many times we have people who present for open innovation. So it's super interesting. This is the path that many entrepreneurs take. And what I'd like to maybe ask, those of you who maybe work with opioids on this call, can you tell us if there is a problem in Alaska with the chain of custody? And probably with that, we'll wrap up our conversation. But how big of a problem does Alaska have with some of the issues that Steve has talked about?
While we're waiting, I can kind of give more details about that. So they're specifically going to patients' homes that have chronic pain, that have pain pumps that are embedded under the skin. And so they're doing basically the infusion of the liquid, of the concentrated liquid formula of the opioids for specific patients, and doing that in their own homes. So it's not traditional sort of management for pain. Usually it's a pill format, but this is much more kind of cutting edge, special localized administration of the drug, and it also requires a lot less of the drug as well. So
okay, well, you've educated me. And Nigel has put something else in the chat. He's put lots of information in that I'd be happy to share. There's also funding for customer discovery work to explore needs in other industries, Steve. So, and Nigel directs a I-Core program here in Alaska. So he might be definitely a good connection for you, and I can make that for you. So,
I'm looking at a couple other things in the chat. The lifespan we were expecting to do, if it's taking a lot of abuse in the retail supply chain, we expect it to be able to handle about 100 to 200 deliveries or about a year or two of service. If it's taking a lot of drops and shocks and vibration exposure. But if it's just being used as a storage device, it'll last for decades, like I said, like a traditional refrigerator. And then the other thing was, so the problem for adoption, the 10K is a high price point. We could definitely move that down if we need to, depending on bulk orders of product or where we are just in the timeline of the launch. So definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Steve. And is there, besides the connections that you've already gotten, is there anything else you'd like to ask or kind of wrap up for this community about?
No, I just want to thank you guys again for listening and for the awesome questions, Jake, Nigel, everybody else. Thank you.
You're very welcome. And thank you very much for presenting. It's been a joy to get to know you, Steve, and I'm excited about your journey. So thank you. Thank you for presenting. And thank you all who attended today. Super nice to see you. We'll be back here in 2 weeks. So please join us then. And be safe out there. So thank you for coming, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.